A Moroccan bloke slips into Hartlepool and decides that it's the perfect stage for a total horror show. A local septuagenarian, a bloke in his 70s collecting his pension, becomes the unwitting star of this terrorist's tirade. He committed a European tour, right, complete with rejections from both Finland and Germany, until he saunters into Britain unasked in 2020. And guess what? We in Britain, like mugs, let him stay. We give him a bed, we give him board, we give him benefits in Hartlepool. And a North East man lost his life as a consequence. Here we are, his life snuffed out by Islamism, and the media, frankly, is about as silent as the G in lasagna. And meanwhile, another seeker of sanctuary lands here, and before you know it, he's sporting one of those Hamas headbands like it's the latest must-have from a fashion website. It's a really bleak picture, I think, as we see the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg being swarmed by pro-Palestine protesters. The left has taken a really dangerous dalliance with extremism and Islamism, while our country's alarm bells are being utterly censored on this, and we simply can't talk about it. So I want to know when the reality check is going to bounce. Chloe, when will it bounce?
I feel like it's never going to bounce, because it seems like no matter how many of these horrifying stories we get of people who have come here illegally doing horrifying things to people in this country, people don't seem to care and the boats don't seem to stop. It goes on and on. This comes in the same week that we've had the news of the Tunisian migrant being found guilty of wearing that headband in support of Hamas. What kind of culture are we importing into this country? It has to end. And this individual said that they were going to kill thousands more if they had a machine gun, and that he would have stabbed even more people if the knife hadn't cut his hand whilst he was stabbing this pensioner. So it could have been a lot worse than it already is.
Ben, Leo, do you think actually that the likes of Germany being able to say no thank you, goodbye, does it suggest that actually we are an outlier within Europe for allowing some of the worst vestiges of humanity to stay here at our taxpayer dime?
Very eloquently put, Sam. Look, I don't know what's going on. I don't think there's the political will to sort this out, because not only have the Tories allowed insane amounts of legal migration, 700,000 over the course of a couple of years, they also can't stop dinghies crossing the channel, just flimsy, inflatable dinghies. We used to rule the waves, rule Britannia. We conquered the world with our navy, and now we can't stop some dinghies from the local Tesco in Calais coming over. To me, it's very, very bizarre. In actual fact, it's so incompetent, it does make me wonder sometimes whether it's, intentional in some way. Because if you really wanted to stop the boats, all you have to do is adopt, and I've been saying it for weeks, is adopt the policy of Australia, which is turn them back, put them into very safe lifeboat-style vessels, and you can do that. People can say you can't do it under the ECHR. You can do it under the United Nations Law of the Seas, Article 25. You're stopping a boat's innocent passage if it's deemed to be a threat to national security. So you can do it. There's just not the political will. And as I said, because they haven't done it, and because of their behaviour, the government's behaviour with legal migration, it makes me think they don't really care about it.
Before I bring in the compassion crazy in that side of the room, I want to go to the Conservative in the room. Now, 14 years of Conservative government, and this is just getting worse and worse, isn't it? And that's why people are tearing their hair out.
Well, there's been a long-standing commitment to bring immigration down from the hundreds of thousands to the tens of thousands. That is. That was a David Cameron. That was a David Cameron.
This is a headline. It's not a comedy show.
That was a David Cameron pledge. And look, it's absolutely right that we need to control immigration into our country, particularly illegal migration. But the key point is making sure that people, these awful people, particularly that story that you just talked about. We heard another story. It was Abdul Zidi, that Clapham killer. Horrifying events that take place. People that should not be allowed.
Alkaline attack.
Exactly so. And but people that shouldn't be in this country, who are allowed in, should not be happening. And that guy was rejected on two counts previously, then became a born-again Christian, and used that as leverage to get into the country. And
sorry, you sound like every Conservative politician over the past 10 years. You say all the right things, but ultimately it's hot air. It doesn't mean anything. And all that happens is more people lose their lives. Communities continue getting dismantled and disenchanted with each other. You know, you say the right things, but you're not trusted anymore. You and your ilk and your party are not trusted.
It's been going on for years, and look, John Reid was the Labour Home Secretary who said the Home Office wasn't fit for purpose. It still clearly hasn't been looked at properly. It still hasn't got its act together. And that's
I don't think it's an endorsement to say that after 14 years of power, with a great majority at the moment, that you've done nothing to fix a problem that was highlighted in, I think, 2006.
Well, this government, I can assure you, because I worked in it for a temporary amount of time, that, you know, has done more than any other to try and get immigration under control.
The figures are worse than ever.
It has done more than most, and you know, Rishi Sunak should be credited for that.
Charlie, they actually done.
Well,
give us some evidence.
Well, they've made sure that people that are bringing in partners, if you're studying in the UK universities, that is being curtailed. There is a point-based system now in terms of getting into the UK.
Before the election, though.
It is something, you know, lots of things have been taking place, and these are just two examples.
Right. Charlie, you might have been in the government, but nothing's worked. That's what's evident. You know, I don't accept what Darren says, where he says rather unfairly, this is a failure of the left. The Tories are in power and have been for a long time.
It was your man, Tony
started it. No, hang on. The problem with the boats was not only not happening under the last Labour government, it was a problem in trucks, which they managed to pretty clearly solve. The numbers crashed down for the number of people hiding in things like trucks and lorries and vans by new technology. But as David Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, said earlier this week, one of the reasons that we can't do what Ben says, which is to just send them back and France accept that, is because we have no agreement with France. When we were in the EU, there was an agreement, so we could turn the boats back. Brexit has caused this problem.
We've just spent £500 million. We've sent £500 million to France. We do have an arrangement with France.
But that doesn't mean that they have to take all the boats turned back.
So explain to me why Ireland, an EU member, is turning round and saying we're getting an influx of migration to this country and it's Britain's fault. They're in the EU. Why can they not send them back to France?
It was the Foreign Secretary. Well, first of all, it's quite far. I think that might be
from Ireland.
I think that might be a bit less practical than the Channel, which is the busiest area and where they have a fairly short distance to go. But the Foreign Secretary himself said that we gave up that agreement when we left the EU. That's why it wasn't the scale of the problem before. And the second thing to say is that this fella was here illegally. That was known. And the reason he was still here was because we have this enormous backlog dealing with migration cases, because you haven't hired enough people to deal with it.
His response to that is to say, come on, come all, free and safe routes.
Stop talking about Labour, blaming Labour. The Tories have been in power for 14 years, some of that in a coalition.
I'm not blaming
Stop talking about Labour all the time.
I'm saying
Labour aren't even in power at the moment.
Their solution to the problem.
Who cares what their solution is?
Well, because they're going to form the government.
It can't be any worse.
I think it's pretty important.
It cannot be any worse than the Conservatives.
Oh, please. It absolutely can be. I promise you that.
Charlie.
Well, I tell you what, the last time Labour was in power, migration was a third of what it is today.
Right, OK. Who's going to go next then?
Well, let me take this up, because I think it continues the mounting defence for Rishi Sunak, because despite the breaking news this evening of a Conservative MP defecting to the Labour Party, a small Westminster bubble story, this is something that will not deter the Conservatives for continuing the fight to go on and win the next general election. This is the comeback for the Conservatives. It's a Rishi revival, spending 2.5% of GDP on our defence by 2030. That is something that is tickled the cockles of every Conservative supporter, including myself. It's a week where he has got through his flagship bill, his policy to stop the boats through the Rwanda policy, a deterrent that will address some of the issues, not in total, but will help to stop those boats coming over, because it is a deterrent. That's the point of the policy. And you will just see from next week and the week after next a succession of policies, I'm sure, and announcements coming from the government, coming from Rishi Sunak, to make sure that he's delivering on those priorities that he said he was going to do. That's inflation coming down, that's growing the economy, that is dealing with the backlog in the NHS, and that is stopping
Charlie, that's enough.
And that is why the Conservatives are still in the fight.
That you can't meet.
Do we have actual Dan Poulter speaking to the Beeb?
The party I was elected into valued public services. It had a compassionate view about supporting the more disadvantaged in society. I think the Conservative Party today is in a very different place. Its focus is not on delivering or supporting high-quality public services.
Well, I tell you what, rat down a drain pipe springs to mind for me, because clearly he's getting on aboard the Labour boat before the Tory one goes doolally and down the plug hole, I'm afraid.
Well, I don't think it will get down. But I mean, I struggle when I hear Dan say that because, you know...
I think you struggle a lot,
Well,
to be honest,
it's under this guy. I struggle with you. But I think, look, it's under this government that it's dealt with some of the backlogs in the NHS, OK? It's a government that has invested more than ever before in the NHS.
Okay,
it's got another 75 workforce plan that announced just in November of this year. It is doing more than any other government to help the NHS.
Look, the fact is that there is someone who has given much of his life to the Tory party, just like you do, except he actually managed to get a seat. And he is saying there that he can't look his constituents in the eyes. I think he says he's a doctor and he knows how bad the NHS has got and that he can't justify it to himself. And so that's why he's switched sides. Do you not think that it tells an incredible story when someone who has given decades of their life to the Conservative Party and the Conservative cause sees that party as failing his own constituents?
Why didn't he do that years ago? Why now, months before an election, when he's at risk of losing his seat? There's absolutely zero integrity from that chap. I'm sure he's a perfectly nice guy, by the way. But months before an election, you bail, you turn from a Conservative into a socialist Labour supporter. That is ridiculous. I don't believe you can change mindsets just like that. He is absolutely taking the mickey doing it months before.
I think he's following what most people in the country are doing.
If he had any integrity, he would have gone years and years ago. And by the way, Charlie, you sound like Comical Ali from the Iraq War. Everything's fine. The tanks are rolling in behind us. Baghdad is absolutely in ruins. And you're standing there saying, everything I'm not saying everything's
I'm not saying everything's fine. There are clearly huge issues and challenges in the country. COVID was one of those. And it was under this Prime Minister, who was the Chancellor of the
looks the country down.
who invested more than ever in the NHS to protect people's lives and livelihoods. Now, there's a bill to pay for that. It's a £400 billion bill, as you were just saying. That needs to be paid for. That's why you can only pay for that if you have a strong economy. But you also need then...
We haven't got a strong economy. It's going at 0.1%.
Inflation is coming down. Yes, but you wouldn't be growing the economy if you didn't take the policies and the approach that Rishi Sunak has taken.
I'm sorry, Charlie, you and your party have consigned this country to 5-10 years of Labour, and it's unforgivable. With the majority you had in 2019, it's just totally incompetent.
Sunak has been busy running, but I'm not sure it's running for election.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Very nice. I'm glad you're wearing a long sleeve as well. That's good. I got into running. Properly when I was at graduate school.
Yeah.
And I took up running because my wife was the big runner.
Yeah.
Obviously we weren't together at the time. But I thought I was
trying to impress her, eh?
Now, I think that's actually quite a nice video. I think Rishi Sunak comes across well. I'm delighted for him in that sense. But
and for those who don't know, that was the hardest geezer
who across Africa.
Yeah, exactly. So has been pretty heroic to lots of people. So he's clearly trying to get that association. Which
he's from your neck of the woods.
He's from West Sussex. Yeah, he lives in my town. He's friends with a couple of my friends. He's a very good chap. I mean, I quite liked that bit of content from Rishi Sunak. I think that on a social media level and the content he's producing, it's pretty good. But
yeah, but I do feel like Rishi Sunak is putting all his work at the moment into trying to look like a cool guy who's down with the kids, when actually people just want someone who is competent and actually gets the job done.
I quite like Rishi Sunak. I think he seems like a perfectly decent, capable guy. And in that video, if you watch the extended version, he talks about his Hindu faith and something called Dharma, which is connected with his faith. And he says that, as long as I can look myself in the mirror after
a long Jeffrey or Jeffrey Dahmer?
Oh, Ben.
That's worse than my mental asylum job. Now, do you actually think, though, that Rishi Sunak should be running a sort of Silicon Valley company as opposed to, the United
Probably.
Kingdom?
I mean, with wearing sambas with your suit and, all this kind of social media stuff, that's probably what he's angling for because he knows his time's up. I'm sure he's a perfectly nice guy. He seems like a good family man. But all this stuff, all these great policies, the defence policy is great, everything else, it's far too late. You should have listened to your members years ago when they wanted your attention. Instead, you ignored them. I was about to say something, how can I phrase this in a viable way? He threw it up the wall. Well, the majority. He stabbed Boris in the back.
He's been Prime Minister for not even 2 years, and I think he came in at a time where it was obviously very, very difficult. He's a man that, as you were saying, I don't think people dislike Rishi Sunak. I think people would rather have him around their dinner table for a night out than they would Sir Keir Starmer. Boring, snoring Starmer, I'd say.
I can't believe how much you are defending a guy who can only meet 1 out of 5 of his priorities, most of which is supposedly down to the Bank of England. This defence stuff that you're saying is a win for Sunak. It really is too little too late. He had a perfect opportunity at the spring budget to bring up defence, which everyone was expecting. Didn't say anything, just came up with some fake tax cut, tried to trick us into think that we're going to end up with more money in our pockets. But actually, because of fiscal drag, it's not the case. So it was a rubbish budget. He had a good opportunity there to do something good. He didn't. It's only now at the last minute that he's decided to say, oh, actually, we'll put a date on it and say 2030 rather than say when economic conditions allow, as they did before, which was just ridiculous.
Well, I think probably at the time of the budget, it was still maybe being worked out and wouldn't have been ready in time. He's someone that isn't going to take a risk with the people's economy. He's not going to take a risk with people's finances.
14 years.
And so I think he was waiting for the perfect time to make that announcement, which was obviously last week with NATO, with the NATO General Secretary, to say that the UK is able to spend that money because of the way in which he's run the economy.
Our country and society is fragmented like I've never seen before, and a lot of older people say the same thing, and that's down to the Tories, and it is unforgivable.
Well, it won't be. Well, it won't be. Well, if you think it's going to be repaired by voting for the Labour Party or Reform, then that's for the birds.
Well, it would just be nice to have the chance to vote. We're all waiting for him to tell us.
OK, 7,000 migrants across the Channel so far this year, 350 of them across today, Mark White says from GB News. So, that pledge is somewhat snookered.